had another really clear Bigfoot sighting in Illinois. This is what I was talking about with the state-by-state thing, okay? Because my granddad had a place in Illinois, and he told my dad that he was seeing Bigfoot, and I don't think my dad believed him. But this was my mother's father. And the last visit I had, that we all had as a family, I think I was 10 or 11. And this was part of where, like it would seem to be lessening a little bit, but I was 10 or 11. I'm sitting, out in Granddad's yard. I hear a bird, and my grandparents, being an older couple and not having kids anymore, they were just into birds. So they had bird feeders everywhere. So I learned a lot about birds from them, right? Hear this beautiful bird call, thinking it's a bird. I'm looking up. He had Aztec sunflower, like the huge, huge blossoms. Those things grow. I just found out recently they grow up to 12 feet.
Ooh, jeez, it's huge. Did not know that.
Okay, now standing in those was this huge, like once my eyes focused, there was just this huge hulking something. And I see it blinking, and then I kind of jumped, and when I jumped, I sort of startled it. And I ran into the house, told my family again that I had seen a monster, got yelled at. My grandfather's like, where? So they all came running outside, and I pointed to where the sunflowers were. And then it was like this huge patch of light was there all of a sudden, and it wasn't there before. And he was super excited about it, but I got yelled at by everybody for making up a story again, and I started crying. So it was kind of at that point where I was like, nobody believes. It's like the people I needed most to believe me didn't believe me, right. Which was really starting to kind of, I think, really was traumatizing in a way.
It definitely wears on you after a while. Yeah.
It does, and it also led to me blocking out a lot of stuff because I was like, there has to be something wrong with me, But my grandfather was like, he yelled at them and, defended me, and then he made everybody go inside, and he was like, once they calmed down, because he was super excited, he's like, tell me what you saw, honey. And my grandfather was 6'3", and I pointed to the sunflower patch, and he kept raising his hand above his head, tell me how high to have my hand where this thing's head was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I'm pretty sure it was all the way where his palm was, once his hand was all the way up. So those blossoms brushed up against this thing's pecs.
Oh, jeez. So it was at least like over, maybe 13 feet?
12 feet. Yeah. It was at least over 12 feet because those Aztec sunflowers, because I just bought some because I want to plant them eventually, they grow up to 12 feet.
That's crazy.
So this thing was huge, but that was a part of it. Like I really began to feel like there was just something wrong with me. And
how old were you when this happened?
Oh, I was probably about 10 or 11. It was the last summer that my parents were together. But getting into like the teenage stuff, I sent, and if you really want to, I don't know for sure, like if you guys have pictures when you air this, but I have this picture still.
Mm-hmm. And
I showed this picture to Vic, and I think I sent it to a couple other people, but I still have it. I've got it in my photo album, like out in my living room. I moved away. Okay, so we moved away from Vermont when like I said, like just a few weeks before my 13th birthday. My parents had split up. We moved to the DC area. And for that following summer, I came back to Vermont to visit my best friend who had some weird stuff going on with. And my first, I think, weekend back, I was staying with her. And she had invited some of our friends from school over and like her cousin and stuff for a slumber party. So her mom was at work and her dad wasn't home from work yet. And I think maybe her older sister was home. I don't really know. But, we were taking a lot of pictures and, just being girls and stuff. She took this one picture of me next to her window. And this is on the second story of a house, okay? In the picture are a pair of glowing eyes looking in the window at me, and the window's open.
Hmm.
So, and I told Vic this story, okay? So, and I have referred to this on a few other podcasts as the slumber party incident. So, when I don't even remember taking that picture. Because there's just a lot that happened that night. But
yeah.
What I do remember is that we had the window open, and there was just a screen there. That was it. And all of a sudden, we kept hearing this noise, like something was hitting the house. And so finally, we noticed there were rocks, like small rocks, being thrown at the house from across the street. Like, well, not across the street, but across her driveway into the wood line. And right behind her wood line was this river that flowed through town. And behind that was the high school. That's how close she was to the high school. So she did tell me before that her dad got to the point where they had chickens and their chickens were disappearing. So he was locking the coop, but something was getting into the coop. So he moved the coop into the garage. Something was starting to get into the garage and taking chickens. So they had to keep the garage locked at night. So I, for a long time, thought that this was what had triggered this, right?
Right.
The behavior. So something's throwing rocks at the house, and she and I are looking out the window, and I remember her opening the screen, and she's hanging out the window, and she's screaming. She's thinking that it's kids, from somewhere, like maybe they were over at the high school, but it's dark, and they were coming over and throwing rocks at the house.
Yeah.
And at first, she doesn't notice these eyes. I see these eyes in the wood line, and they're almond shaped. That's what was so weird about this. So, again, when I told Vic this, he thought it was a type 3. Now, I don't know what it was because all I saw were eyes. But they weren't the same color as whatever was in the window with me. And if you want, I can send you a picture of this.
Sure.
But anyway, it's throwing rocks, and I'm watching the movement, and you can see the eyes are looking up at us. You can see the eyes going down to the ground. Then you can see the eyes slowly coming back up, and then there's a spray of pebbles hitting the house. The interesting thing about this that really fascinates me still, honestly, whenever a car was coming down the road, the eyes would move into the position where it was watching the car come. And as soon as the headlight got within a few feet, the eyes would disappear. So, as far as I can tell, it either was shutting its eyes or it was moving its whole body away
to hide itself.
And then once the car drove down a few feet, it was almost like the eyes kind of returned, were looking back at the house, and went straight back to picking up pebbles and throwing them at the house. And this went on for about an hour or two, and it freaked us all out. And here's the weird thing, okay? So I'm guessing by that point, my subconscious knew what I'd experienced in the past, but I didn't, because I kind of just sunk to the floor and I was just out of it. Like, I started shaking. I felt terrified. And there was a part of me that was really scared that whatever that was out there knew I was in the house and wanted me on some level, like it wanted to hurt me or something. That's just kind of how I felt.
Right. I
actually just really felt that afraid of it. And I remember her cousin was really scared and jumped in the bed and was she was younger than the rest of us, was hiding under the covers. And the other girl that was over there was just kind of freaked out. And she was like, should I call my dad? My dad will come over and if he needs to. And my friend's still yelling at it because she was an idiot. I don't know. I think she just didn't know what it was, and she thought it was kids.
Yeah.
With glowing eyes, throwing rocks at the house.
Wow.
So that's the scenario, and I'm sitting on the floor trying to find my happy place, because I'm freaked out. So that was the scene with this thing,
jeez,
throwing rocks at us. And so finally, I think she kind of caught the hint that something else was going on. So she shut the window and she just closed the blinds, and we went into another part of the upstairs to sleep because we didn't want to even be in that room. And I think I left town the next day to go visit my sister, who at the time was still living in Vermont. And when I talked to my friend again, she said it came back for 2 more nights and did the same thing.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's very
How old were you again?
13.
13. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you were starting to, and so the activity didn't really change; it just continued.
Well, it like I said, I was starting to kind of shut my childhood out, shut those things with monsters and everything, but it still had weird things happen. And this one's I still don't know what the hell it was. I mean, I started to get to the point where I was having experiences with other people. Okay, so like that happened when I was 15 or 16. I was living in Massachusetts. Again, this is what I was talking about, the weird, like, things were happening to me in other states. But I'd skipped school with some friends of mine, okay? And I lived in Massachusetts, and, you know, it's very, very New Englandish, you know, towns aren't called towns, they're called villages. I mean, it's just kind of the way that it is, right?
Yeah.
There was 4 of us that skipped school. It was me, my best friend, and two guys that we kind of liked, right? And we were wandering around the village. We weren't supposed to be there, you know, supposed to be in school. And there's a convenience store. It's like a little cute little country store that was near a train depot that I think was like inactivated, like it used to be active and wasn't really used anymore. So we decided to split up. Like, we didn't want to go into the store, so me and my guy friend walked over to the train platform, and we jumped down and we're walking along the tracks. And I'm talking to him, and all of a sudden he stops and he kind of gets this look on his face. And I look ahead on the train tracks, and we see what I think is just a really tall guy all dressed in black. And he's moving pretty fast. He's booking up the train tracks towards us, right? Not running, but just really walking fast. And so we stop and we're kind of looking, and we're talking to each other, and we're like, what is that? And I'm like, it's just some guy. And he's like, no, I don't think that's a guy. So we're watching this thing come closer, and it's walking along the railroad ties, and you can actually hear its feet hitting the railroad ties. And I think it stopped, I'm going to guess maybe within 30 feet of us, right? But it was definitely close enough where you could see, it kind of had like a humpback. That's really the only way I can describe it. The legs, it just looked like the knees were bent, like not like it was standing up straight, but just the knees were bent. But black eyes, sort of a snout, and it was looking back and forth between him and I. And we bolted. Both of us just bolted because we didn't know what we were looking at. So we ran out of there and Scooby-Dooed back up the platform. And we just had to kind of stop for a minute to catch our breath, right? And I'm looking around the corner at this thing to see if it's coming, and it just kind of stood there for a minute, and then it walked down into the wood line. Now, the weird thing about, I mean, that was weird anyway, but the weird thing about this was my grandmother lived in a neighboring village, probably about 20 minutes away. And in the same week, I was getting ready for bed. It was like when I had left I'd left my mom in Maryland. Like, I decided I wanted to live with my dad, right? So it was like that first year of after moving from Vermont to Maryland, outside of DC, to Massachusetts, and now I'm living with my dad, right? We were living at my grandmother's house for the time being, and my sister joined us from Vermont. And I'm getting ready to go to bed, and I know it was a school night and everything, and back then we had shades. We didn't have blinds, and so hopefully your listeners know what shades are.
Yeah.
So we had shades, and she had this ranch style house, and she lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, which was relatively new. And I'm getting ready to pull the shade down, and for some reason, and I know a lot of people say that when they have these experiences, but something just kind of made me look down at the ground, and it was really dark out, and she was surrounded by woods. So I'm looking at the ground, and all of a sudden I see a pair of eyes look up at me. And I don't know what this was, okay? But I do know, it's interesting enough because I've heard this description. I've heard it mostly associated with Dogman, where it was like that weird kind of green, sort of amber. Only the pupils looked more slit-like. So I see these eyes look up at me, and whatever it was did a push-up. And then it stood right up, and it pressed itself up against the glass. And so the only thing that's between me and it is glass. And I can't make out any other details than the eyes. And again, it looks like the ears were pointed, but they really seem to appear to be on the side of this thing's head. I dive into like my bed, and I roll over and quickly pull the shade down on the other window, like that's facing the street. And I hear a growl on that end and something hit the house. And then I'm laying there and I'm trying really hard to convince myself that I just imagined it and that it didn't happen. Okay, so I'm doing this over and over again, like just this mantra in my head, because there's no more noise, right? So I'm like, okay, well, there's nothing out there. You know, like I had to have imagined that. There's no way I saw that. There's no way any of that happened, right? And so by the time I calmed myself down and just convinced myself that I had imagined it, my dad came home, and like I said, you know, he had a problem with alcohol, but he was a very avid member of AA for a long time. So his schedule was like clockwork. And if you went to the meeting, by the time he was coming home, it was about 9:30 at night. So his headlights hit the house, and as soon as they hit the house, I hear another growl, and something hit the house, and I can hear something moving off into the woods.
And this happened, how old were you?
I was 15, going on 16. And again, that was in another state. So again, that's part of just what's really weird for me, you know, is multiple states. But I think the only other thing that happened when I was a teenager, I didn't even have a clear sighting, but I think I got zapped. And that was when I was 17. And I was a total metalhead. And I was back when like Motley Crue was popular and all this other stuff, right? There were some water towers in my neighborhood, also in Massachusetts, in a different town though, but not that far apart, right? So I decided I was going to paint some lyrics on this water tower that was in my neighborhood, you know, get in trouble and vandalize, that kind of stuff. So I'm up there and I'm getting ready to do it, and all of a sudden, I hear something growling, and I thought it was a dog because it sounded like a dog. I hear something growling, and the trees are moving, and the really weird thing that happened was the image of a werewolf popped into my head, and then all of a sudden I got super dizzy, really, really dizzy, and I went home and I was sick for 4 days.
Whoa.
And I thought it was the flu, but now I think that I actually got hit with infrasound.
That's a lot. A lot of people have reported that to me. Like, I mean, not a lot, but there was a park ranger that had told me that this thing roared at him, and then he was sick for like a couple days after that, nausea, and he was not able to think clearly.
Yeah.
Couldn't drive. He was kind of in a fog, and he couldn't eat anything, and it's like it did something to his equilibrium.
Mm-hmm. It's like your body has to reset. It's really weird.
Mm-hmm.
But I was sick for 4 days. Nothing else cryptid-wise happened for a while. I did have a really strange... Well, I had a couple of like strange things that were more ghostly. Like, okay, so I had my own round of being involved with the occult at one point. Okay, and I bought this book. Yeah, I bought a book. Found it in an antique store. I don't recommend buying it, okay? But it was like, I think it was actually called The Complete Book of the Occult or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Bought this book, found it in an antique shop down the street because it was just that kind of area, right? Brought it home, was really excited about it. Found some stuff in there, and so I know I was definitely 16 by this time, right? I found a spell that you're supposed to only do on Halloween. If you're a young maiden and you have to be a virgin, if you do this spell at midnight on Halloween, then you like say the incantation. You have to do all this stuff. It's really complicated, right? You have to say the words, eat an apple, and brush your hair and look in the mirror at the same time, right? And in the mirror, you'll see your true love, right? So of course I'm going to try it.
Right.
So
I want to know who this is.
Yeah, of course.
So I did this, right? And it was like I'd gone out with my friends before, and I'm home. You know, I made it home for curfew. Had this whole thing planned out, and it's thundering and lightning out, so it's perfect setting for this whole thing. So I do this, right? Brushing my hair, doing the whole thing, and there's a strike of lightning, and over by the window there's a black silhouette of a man that appears. Okay, and then it's gone. So I get in the shower, taking a shower, and then all of a sudden, illuminated in the droplets of water is the figure of a man. But again, and I don't know what the hell this is. Okay, I mean, it just seems like some entities can use light. Okay, but it also makes me think of what the Bible says, like how the devil can appear as an angel of light because he once was an angel of light. I don't know,
Right.
but it was like light, but it looked like an aura, I guess, of like pink light, and I could see the shape of a man, and I could see like this beautiful face that kind of looked angelic, and it was forming in the water with me in the shower. Okay, and then all of a sudden I started to feel like I was physically being touched, and there was half of me that was going, wow, this is really cool, and then there was a part of me that was like screaming in my mind like, this is really bad because I don't know what I just did. And then I said the words, Jesus save me. And as soon as I did that, and I wasn't a believer in God or anything at the time.
Yeah.
I just said, Jesus save me. And as soon as I did that, the face turned really ugly and it roared at me.
Ooh.
And it was gone.
Wow.
That just made me uncomfortable. Jeez.
So I burned that book later. I also burned my Ouija board with it too, because I had one of those. The weird thing is when I would burn them both, the Ouija board screamed.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard that a lot. Yeah.
That was weird. The other thing, okay, yeah, this one still kind of hurts me in my heart. So I had a boyfriend who died when I was 20. He died in a car accident with a friend of mine, and everybody was devastated, of course. I think like about a month after the funeral and everything, at the time I was living with his sister, and like I was renting the upstairs of like their house. And she came to me one day and she said, my parents really miss the sound of somebody being upstairs. Will you go with me and my husband to my mom and dad's and spend the night? Just because if they hear somebody up there, it's gonna make them feel a little bit comforted, because they were really missing their son.
Yeah.
And so I said, sure, it's fine. And his room was completely untouched, of course, and he used to play guitar. And so they had the window open, so I went in there, and the first kind of interesting thing was that the curtain sort of blew forward, and it brushed the strings of the guitar, and I thought that was kind of weird. And then I settled down for the night, and I was laying there on my side, and I was thinking about him and just thinking about everything and really missing him. And then all of a sudden, I felt fingertips brushing my temple and my hair.
Was that something that he did?
As he was never that affectionate towards me. But it didn't stop. And I remember, like, I started praying, and I was like, God, whatever's happening right now, please make it stop. And it didn't stop. And, it was very gentle, but I was terrified.
So you don't think it was like malevolent at all then?
I don't know I honestly don't know what it was, but it was like someone was there with me, and they kind of pressed their chest into my back. And I think I finally just passed out from fear. But when I woke up, I looked at that side of the bed, and it really seriously looked like somebody had slept there. But I never went back to that house. Like, I refused to go after that because it really freaked me out.
Yeah.
So.
And so, when did the cryptid activity start back up for you?
That wasn't until I moved back, and a lot of that was just really, really textbook. Okay, so that was following the death of my boyfriend. About 4 months later, my sister and her then husband decided that they wanted to move back to Vermont from Massachusetts, and they asked me to go. So it's the same town. It's Bennington. My mom's been there since like the 60s, off and on. She's been there for a really long time. And my stepdad bought this place back in the 80s, and he had to build the road. I mean, he had like bulldozers and stuff just so he could like plow a road up the side of this mountain. And in fact, my mom told me this crazy story about when he was building his house. he had the bulldozer parked outside, and he had like a little shack that he built for himself while he was working on the house. He came out in the morning one time, and there was a boulder sitting on the seat. So he had to figure out all day how he was going to get this boulder off the seat without hitting the tracks of this bulldozer. And so he kind of knew that something was up. And like I said, he's very protective about this, but he just calls them the neighbors, right? Yeah. So when we moved up there, my mom and my stepdad used to work in the medical field. They're elderly now. They're retired. But they decided that they wanted to go work at a hospital in Gallup, New Mexico. So they pretty much just gave us the keys to the place, and left. And I took a year off because I was still grieving. But we were living off grid. So no electricity. We had outhouses. We only had a wood stove for heat. But he wanted some land cleared for a pond. That's his hobby. So he kept all that heavy equipment. And he sometimes gets hired by people to build ponds. So he would just, do that. But he had several ponds on the property. And there's this one beautiful, it's absolutely beautiful. I saw it this past summer because that's when my sister got married. It was out in the middle of nowhere. And he wanted us to clear the land. And at the same time, we had to get wood for winter. So it just kind of started as textbook with anybody that knows anything about, Class B stuff. I mean, we were having rocks thrown at us. Yeah. Like if we were splitting wood by hand, we would be doing that, and then we would hear tree knocks in the woods. And we didn't know what the hell it was. For a long time, we just thought it was somebody else chopping wood, that kind of stuff.
Classic Sasquatch behavior, basically.
Classic, yeah, like the weird little teepee structures here and there.
And so naturally, you broke them apart and urinated on them.
Yeah. Well, no, didn't do that, but I did kick over rock piles.
Oh, man.
So big, fine rock piles in weird places, and I'd kick them over.
Market dominance.
Yeah. Then you threw the rocks out in the woods and beat your chest.
And it's just some weird noises here and there. And I do remember one thing that happened that was really just creeps me out more now that I think about it. Like at the time, I didn't know anything about what was going on, but my sister and my niece was 18 months. So it was my sister and my niece and I, we all thought the chipmunks were so cute. We wish that we could pet one and all this other stuff. And we were talking about it a lot while we were out working in the middle of the woods. Well, one night we came back to the house and I opened up the sliding glass door to go out onto the deck, and there was this dead chipmunk right in the middle of the mat. And I mean, this thing, it wasn't bloodied. Okay. It wasn't even, it was fresh. It was limp. And it was just sitting right in the middle of the mat. And I didn't think about it at the time because we blamed anything weird on the cat, Right. Cat, my mom's cat was there. And so we thought maybe his name was Freddie. We thought maybe Freddie had killed it and bought it. But it was kind of weird.
Gifts.
And you thought Freddie was throwing rocks too?
No, we blamed that on squirrels. Because it wasn't just, I'm serious, because we didn't know what it was.
They do that. Yeah.
Squirrels.
They'll make noise inside the walls, yeah.
Yeah.
Should have had some throw acorns at me.
We'd have little twigs thrown at us. We'd have dirt. Something was throwing dirt at us.
Yeah.
And little pine cones.
Yeah.
And it felt like it was coming from the trees, so we would look up and we couldn't see anything. So we're okay, squirrels. Except this one rock got thrown at my brother-in-law's head, and it was the size of a golf ball.
That's not good.
And that pissed him off because my stepdad had a Kubota, and we would hook up this wagon to it that we were throwing all the wood in. And he was driving, and we were actually sitting in the back of the wagon on the way down there to do some work, and this huge rock just missed him by an inch. And he was pissed.
Wow, I was mad too.
So that went on. Really weird stuff would go on, during the winter, something would hit the house and a bunch of snow would fall off. That was just weird. The neighbor had dairy cows. It was a dairy farm. And I would hear for a long time, what I thought was a cow at night. Until the next night I'd hear the cows, and I was like, okay, whatever that was not a cow. So whatever this was would hit a really long note. And it was a low tone, and it would just hold it. So it was a call of some sort, right?
Yeah.
And actually, my very first night there was laughter in the woods and what I thought were flashlights, but now I know it was eye shine. That was my very first night back in Vermont when I was living up there at 21. But anyway, so we would hear this weird low tone stuff. Sometimes we'd be in the woods. I'd hear somebody call my name, and it would sound like my sister or my brother-in-law. And then I'd ask them later on, I'd be like, "Hey, did you call me?" And they were like, "No, we were here." That would happen when I enlisted in the military. It was there, and I was trying to get in shape. So like I quit smoking and I started jogging the perimeter of the hill that they lived on. And there was this one section of woods that was really dark. Excuse me. And every time I'd get down there, I would hear several things moving in the woods around me. And at first I thought it was deer, because actually there was one time something flushed a buck out, and the buck leapt over my head while I was running.
Oh, wow. That would be.
Yeah, like I'm running, I look up and I see the underside of this buck going over me. At the same time, I was lucky I didn't get kicked in the head.
Yeah, for real. That's dangerous.
There'd be something moving around in the trees, and sometimes I would hear what sounded like whispers or laughing. And every once in a while, I swear it felt like something was very close to me, because I would feel breath on the back of my neck. And then when I would turn around and whatever it was gone. So this was almost a daily occurrence when I took up jogging. And I started jogging in the summer because I had to leave for basic training in August. So there were some days when I was just too busy to stop in that section of woods because I had other things to do that day. But very rarely was there never not any noise or just something strange. But it was almost a daily occurrence there. And so the biggest thing that happened that really I don't know what it was, but my sister and I were together, and I'm pretty sure it was a couple weeks before I was getting ready to leave for basic training. And we were outside in the yard, and by that time I think that my mother and my stepdad had come back from New Mexico, but we heard a gunshot, and then we heard something roar, and it's God. Do you know who Thinker Thunker is?
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He's got a recording. He has 2 recordings that he played back to back. One is from that recording that came from Canada a few months ago, of like some couple stopped on the side of the road, and I think they have a small kid with them, and something's howling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he took that and he played it next to something that he heard in Georgia. This is what we heard in Vermont. And it really sounded like a roar. And so there was a gunshot and a roar. And my sister and I just stopped and just kind of looked at each other. And, there might have been there's like a perfect timing. So the roar, and then silence for maybe 3 seconds, and then the roar again, but it was further away. And then another few seconds passed, and the roar again, even further away. Few seconds passed, and then you could hear it just very faintly in the distance. So whatever that was running away from the gunshot was moving.
Yeah.
At some pretty
quickly.
Speed. So somehow or another, my stepdad shows up, and my sister told him what happened and what we heard, and he just gets this look on his face. Okay, he would talk about, like, if there was weird stuff around the property, he'd say the neighbors. We thought people. Okay, like we didn't know it was an inside joke that he had. It was his stupid little inside joke, right? So he's kind of looking around, he's listening, and he just gets this grave look on his face. And then he calls my stepbrother, and my stepbrother's there within like 15 minutes. And they get in the truck and they drive on one of the paths that he's mowed, and they're gone for maybe an hour. And we've been back and forth because, like, my mom started to get worried because she was, she didn't hear the noises, but we told her what happened, but she was concerned. About an hour passes, and here comes my stepdad walking out of the woods with a rifle. And my stepbrother then is in his truck driving past the house and leaving. And my stepdad comes up to us, and my sister's very, she's very much an antagonist. And so she lights into him, and she's like, what happened? What did you find? Blah, blah, blah. And he just looks at her, and he's like, look, don't ask me any questions, and we're not going to talk about this ever. Okay? He's like, as far as I'm concerned, you didn't hear anything.
Wow.
And that was it. So we were really freaked out, and we were kind of more baffled by his behavior. And I haven't been around a whole lot. It just, once I left for the Army, I ended up getting married. I had kids. I was with my ex for 20 years, and I lived in all these different places. So I haven't been around a whole lot. But on one of my visits, actually, when I got off active duty, I went home for a couple of months, and he was building. He's kind of well off. He was building himself an airstrip on the property, and he had a plane that he built, like one of those glider type things, right? And he had some wood that he had to pick up from a section that he cleared, and he wanted me to help him with it. So he's running the chainsaw, and I'm doing something else, and then all of a sudden I see my stepdad wave at the wood line, at somebody in the wood line, and I'm thinking it's one of his neighbors. And at the time, there was a neighbor that lived down the street that it was a single guy that I kind of had a crush on, so I was hoping it was him, right? So I look in the direction of where he waved, and I'm looking in time to see from a shoulder down, basically what just looks like something covered in like maybe orange hair, and it's retracting back into the tree line, and it's tall. And so he turns the chainsaw off, and he just kind of looks at me, and I kind of look at him, and I don't remember if I asked him, who is that or what is that? But his response was, oh, it's just one of the neighbors. And I just kind of looked at him, and he was like, trust me, you don't want to know. He's like, but we do need to leave now. And I was like, okay. And so we quickly hurried, and he kept telling me to move faster and we were hearing stuff, and I heard something that sounded like a call. And I think I heard something that sounded like a knock, and he just started kind of laughing. He's one of those that if he gets nervous, he's going to laugh. So he was doing that, and he was telling me to hurry up because we needed to go. And I was like, okay, and then, like I said, all of this stuff was actually what led me into wanting to find out more about Bigfoot because I had these memories in my head, for a while. But on a visit later on, he works his land. That's his retirement thing. He's a very much an outdoorsman, and that's his little paradise, right? So he came in from doing something out in the woods, and he was taking his boots off, and he's talking to my mom in the kitchen. And I know this was well into me becoming a mom and having kids and being up for a visit. And he looks at my mom, and he's like, I saw one of the neighbors today, and this is right in front of me. And she's like, oh, really? And they both kind of look at me, and my mom goes, he thinks he sees ghosts. And I was like, really? And he said, yeah, well, they're not ghosts. He said, I don't really know what they are. He said, but they're really tall, and they're covered in hair or fur or something. He said, but if I see one of them, he's like, sometimes they'll see me, and they'll stop and just kind of watch what I'm doing, and then they go about their business, and I go about my business, so we just kind of leave each other alone.
And this was all prior to you joining the military, right?
That part was after. That was after I'd come home, and I ETS'd from the military in 2000 officially.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
so moving forward on the timeline, what happened to you after that? After this last round of incidents?
Well, I was living in Hawaii, so nothing. There's really nothing there. It's beautiful, but it's a really weird place. I don't know if you've ever been.
Yeah.
It's got its own spirit to it,
Yeah, it does.
So, my marriage was bad from the get-go. It was a weird time. It was we didn't get married until after my son was born, and I really think the only reason why he married me was because he knew that if I didn't go to Hawaii with him, because he came down on orders for Hawaii, and I was in the National Guard at the time, but I had my son, so I didn't I stopped going to drill, because I had a baby, and they allowed me to do that, which was nice. But so it took 2 years for me to officially be out. But anyway, my marriage was already a mess, and when we went to Hawaii, we were fighting a lot. And the weird thing is, like, when we would fight, I would sometimes see, and sometimes I do, sometimes I see figures like in an aura, but there'd be like a lot of them in that house. It was really strange, and it was a military installation. But our marriage was really rough, like off and on. But we also had joined the church, so it was really fresh in my Christianity, and it was a really cool church because the pastor was one of these pastors where he didn't say, this is my church. He said, this is our church. And he believed in the supernatural, which was really cool because he'd had enough of his own experience. He was a Filipino guy,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he'd seen enough. He was like, yeah, I know all this stuff is real, So he was a good guy. We were in a good place that way, but I spent 10 years having babies, My son was born in North Carolina, my daughter in Hawaii. I conceived another in Hawaii, and my last two were born in Idaho. So we lived in a lot of places, but cryptid-wise, even supernatural-wise, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot going on for like that time period because everything had changed, and I was at home most of the time. I was either having a baby or I was nursing a baby. But by 2001, when I saw that special on Bigfootville, like I said, I started to study it, and that's when I started to piece a lot together about what was going on my stepdad's property. But then, like I said, I began to remember things. When we moved to Idaho, we moved there in 2004, and there wasn't a whole lot going on except my daughter was beginning to see stuff. Okay, so it's not just me, it's my kids. My kids have had their own experiences with cryptids. And then what's interesting is my grandfather, the one that I told you about, he had his own experiences, but so did his father. In fact, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Maltese tiger or the blue tiger. A lot of people think it's a myth, but my great-grandfather was a missionary to China back like 100 years ago now, literally. And his way of preaching the gospel to the Chinese, he was an avid hunter from Tennessee. And he wasn't getting anywhere with, preaching the gospel to the Chinese, so he needed a segue. And the segue was that in some of these remote villages, there were tigers that were like ballsy enough to go into people's houses and steal their kids and their dogs and stuff. So he was getting wind of this, like he was hearing this from some of the local Chinese, and he was like, I can help. He's like, I'm a hunter. I'm a really good hunter. So he ended up being able to shoot these problem tigers, and that acted as a segue for the Chinese to hear about Jesus for the first time. So it's kind of cool story. So, but he discovered, or he kept saying that he was seeing a blue tiger, and if you actually, when we're off air, if you're interested, I'll tell you his name so you can Google it. There's there's stuff on the internet about this and everything, which I think is really cool. And he wrote a book that I have. This one tiger seemed to elude him the whole time, but it's been considered a cryptid. So I have this really weird family lineage that kind of almost went into my daughter telling me, and my daughter telling me that, we lived super close to a supermarket when we were in Idaho, and we'd let our oldest two together ride their bike to the store and get something for us and bring it back as long as they were together. But my daughter started to tell me that when they were taking the path, she would sometimes hear something growl at her from the wood line. But she said that she also felt like there was something living there that didn't like her. Okay? And she didn't know what that was. She didn't tell me for years. My son, for some reason, thinks that in the house that we lived in, there was a dog that would show up at night and look in his window. And he said that it looked like Anubis. So they started having experiences. Okay, now how weird is that? I don't know. And we're Christians. Okay, so now here's the thing. I went from, and I renounced everything that I was into when I was younger, and I became a full-blown hardcore Christian. Okay, in fact, my ex-husband was a pastor for a time. Okay, so switching even like just my whole spiritual everything, there were still things going on. Okay, so but I didn't have anything. I didn't experience anything until we moved to California, because we were really close to a military installation that was inactive, but I kept seeing things in my peripheral vision when I used to work in mental health, and I actually had two jobs. I was working in a restaurant during the day, and I was working at a residential rehab facility at night. So I was never home. I mean, it's California. It was really expensive. But when I was driving at work at night, it'd be late at night, and it was the next town over, but I would cross through this abandoned military installation, right? And there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, you'd see things running here and there, kind of glimpses, or like eye shine and stuff. And again, like I said, I really knew about Bigfoot, pretty hardcore. Had really been into it. Didn't know anything about Dogman. My daughter, and she's really, she's. My son doesn't like talking about this too much either, but my daughter especially, she's in that phase in life where she's trying to figure out adulthood, and the last thing she wants is for anybody to think she's a weirdo, because of the things she's seen.
Right.
But
totally understand.
Yeah, but she and some of her friends used to sneak out at night. This was like when she was in middle school. Honestly, she'd go spend the night somewhere, and then they'd be like, "Hey, let's go get in trouble on this, abandoned military installation," and they would, right? So it's late at night. She told me the story about it's late at night. They're trying to go to this golf course to cause problems, and they think her friend's little brother's following them. And they finally stopped to take a rest. And she didn't tell me this for years. She actually told me this a couple of years ago. And I was so shook when she told me, because it was so weird to have my child tell me she was experiencing stuff that I'd experienced, right? She said they were sitting down to tie their shoe, and all of a sudden her friend that she was with was finally sick and tired of the quote unquote little brother following them. So she started yelling at like the woods, because she's like, "I can hear you in there, come out." And she said whatever it was, it started to walk towards them, but it stopped just right outside of like a street light. And she said whatever it was had the head of a dog, and it had red eyes. And they ran all the way back home.
Wow.
So she didn't tell me that one for years. She told me that a couple years ago that happened. She didn't want to get in trouble for sneaking out one, but then she told me about it. Well, so she was starting to have some things happen to her.
So you and your family are haunted, and I will have to stay far away from you.
No.
Now, you have a lot that's gone on, and I appreciate you coming on the show and being so open and talking about all this stuff and being perceptive enough to pay attention and realize it and notice it. A lot of people don't. They just kind of, they'll just go through life. Something weird happened, saw something up in the tree. No, that's it, and then they just kind of, and then something else will happen, and they just keep dismissing it. And then when you ask them, "Has anything weird happened to you?" "No, not really." Because they just ignore it over and over again, because the paranormal really is just normal. We just don't perceive it.
Yeah, I think that you're right about that. And it's like I think it's really bad when some people will mislead people and be like, "Oh, your vibration's not high enough to see this." I actually hate that.
Yeah, well,
it's not like it's great. You know what I'm saying? I mean, It happens and it doesn't happen. I'm really analytical. Whenever something weird happens, no matter what it is, I try to put it in a box first, like a normal box. I try very hard to do that. And if it doesn't fit, then obviously it's something else,
Yeah, it's best to be completely objective as much as you can, to try and kind of disprove. But, sometimes you can't do that. So
yeah, not everything fits in a box.
No.
But Lisa, we have been talking, and it's been great. And I appreciate you coming on the show and giving us all that information. And if you would be so kind as to invite the listeners to your group.
Yeah, sure. Just so they know, I'm kind of protective of my group, meaning it's not really. It's a place for, like, I developed it for other researchers and people that have had experiences like this. And I mean, enthusiasts too, but I'm very much anti-bullying, and anti-troll and everything. So if people are interested, you're more than welcome to check it out. The acronym is LISA. So you need to look for the group that's like, it's in all caps, Lisa, but it stands for Lycan International Sasquatch Association. You have to answer 3 questions that we have. It's kind of an interview process. It's actually what we're doing. We're interviewing people. If you really want to join and you don't ask the questions, you're going to get declined instantly. But if you answer the questions, it's kind of like the admin team has sort of like an interview process for letting people in. Only because I don't want it to turn into like some of these other groups that have just gotten horrid. I'm really trying to stop that from happening. But yeah, definitely feel free to check us out. People are more than welcome to contact me on Facebook if if I can help you with a situation. I'm more than happy to do that. Or even if you just want to just talk to somebody about what you've experienced, I do that too. So it's fine.
Yeah. And I appreciate you coming on the show, and I'm sure we'll continue to, have a friendship and work together as much as possible. And that's all the time we have for tonight, folks. Yeah. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Lisa, for coming on the show.
It's no problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So everyone out there, thank you for tuning in, and have a good night.